So, you guys know Deadlock? Cause I sure do. What's interesting is I don't like League or other MOBAs or hero shooters like Overwatch, but goddamn, am I addicted to it.
You know what? I'm greedy. Come here. I'm too greedy. My hubris.
My hubris. Jesus Christ.
I kinda hate actually how much I like it because it's made me procrastinate a lot on DAAC, but I want to get back into the swing of developing this thing. The things I got done since the last video are pretty sporadic, and I think one of my problems is that I'll start working on a new mechanic or art or something, then just move on to something else. Like, take this for example. I added grenades into the game, but all I did was make the model, have it spawn, add some sounds, and have it explode after a certain time. But there's no animation for it, no limit to how many you have, and it doesn't even do damage. So I'm gonna try from now on to see a new mechanic all the way through before moving on to anything else. Anyways, let's go down the list of stuff I did. For art, I made a bunch of props and started replacing the block out of the bar. I made some walls and tables and the bar itself. I always like it when little details of the environment change in a game, such as this chalkboard. Right now it has a telling message left from Sundara, but it'll change to different things between missions. There's a stage too where I might have a band play at some point. Some of my friends and I long for a Herman Miller embody, at least I think they do. For now though, this'll do. I made a watermelon vodka and Jaeger bottle for testing the drinking mechanic and a subsequent animation that shows Stacy taking a swig. I made some animations for sitting down at the bar and taking a drink, something that the player can do to chill out at 2 Real. For weapons, I made a MAC-10, a FAMAS, a Beretta, an M67 grenade, and a pipe to use as a melee weapon. This was before I made the decision to cut down the amount of weapons in the game and only have 1 or 2 for each kind of gun, so some of the weapons that have been shown here will probably be cut. I made the MAC-10 because I implemented the akimbo animations from the previous video, and I love them. You can mix match which guns you dual wield, as long as they can be held with one hand. This means you can have an SMG and a revolver at the same time if you want, though the fire rate is a little fucked. I'll need to figure that out. I added an animation for the throwing too, but I need to make different ones for different kinds of weapons, and there isn't one for throwing akimbo guns yet either. Throwing a weapon will now send it in a straight path while it ignores gravity until it hits something. Then it'll make a nice impact sound and fall to the ground. It also does damage now, and there's a little camera shake depending how close you are to the impact point. I made the kill house I mentioned earlier. It's in a separate part of the bar and it's pretty quick to run through, so I might make it longer. Also, you probably noticed these floor turrets. These were just a quick enemy I made to test damage and stuff, so I might change their model. They fire in bursts which are easy to dodge with the rolling. I also modeled the first humanoid enemy, which are these security androids. They're not fully implemented in the game yet, but they will be by the next devlog. I started the block out where these enemies will be, a corporation called Microwave Inc. Since I'm talking about combat, I might as well bring up that I started working on the melee system. When Stacy is unarmed, she can do that punch-punch-kick combo. These animations aren't final, but I like how they're turning out. I added a punching bag that isn't perfect, but it's better than it was before. The first iteration had no skeleton, the second one had a skeleton but it was really janky, and the third one looks the best so far. I mentioned that I added a metal pipe as a melee weapon, but I still haven't added a special class for melee weapons yet, so right now it just acts like a gun, but I will fix it. It's one of those things that suffers from the phenomenon where I get something started and just don't finish it. If you follow my Twitter, you've probably seen this girl already. She's Suki, and she does a lot of the technical stuff for the team. Here she is all comfy in her Herman Miller. She won't be the only character who talks to you over comms during the mission, but she'll be the main one. She's got these huge round glasses that I wanted to make have that anime-like shine to them, but it doesn't really work when you're looking at them from the isometric perspective. Also, just ignore her hair. I watched a few classic John Woo films, and like the sunglasses Mark had in A Better Tomorrow, so much that I added them to the game. I can swap between both pairs of glasses just by changing the static mesh, which means I can add other cosmetics for the head. I don't know if it's something that people will be really into, but it's nice to know that doing skins and cosmetics will be easy. Stacy's tail now kinda moves like an actual cat's. I changed a bunch of things in the physics asset for her skeletal mesh, and I think it looks much better now. She can also die now, which just throws her in a ragdoll state and will need some attention. The crosshair got an update too, where it will actually render above everything else in the level, and the top part will be blocked by walls, showing the player where their bullets will actually land. The floor part will always move where the cursor is. This system is the same as the one in Madness Project Nexus. I thought it was so good that I wanted to remake it for this game. Someone also mentioned how DAAC reminds them of Project Nexus, and yeah, it's a big influence on this. I added a blueprint actor that can be used to make some interactable objects, like these lockers and the bar stool. With this, it's easy to add new interactable stuff. The E that appears above these objects is pretty minimal, like the new weapon info widget. You might have noticed how intrusive this was in the previous video. It displays the weapon name, the type, the fire rate, and how much ammo it has. The HUD also has new UI elements that I'm testing. I'm using Stacy's old sprite for a character portrait. I made this stuff pretty quickly just to test the layout of each element, and I went back and forth with some friends to let me know which layout they liked the best. I want to explore some other styles for the UI, but I can always just fall back on this. I'm starting to dial in the environment too. I'm experimenting with the rain effects and the reflections like these puddles in the street. They're pretty abrasive right now, so I'll need to improve them. I made a neon sign to test how it'll look in the reflections, and I'm liking it. Let's look at some of the comments from the previous video. Peter Lean says, I think that consuming alcohol decreasing handling and tasks that require more accurate coordination like shooting less accurate will be pretty swag, with the alcohol meter determining how bad it is, but the buffs should also be being faster in everything and maybe even a damage buff. There was a reply from the Lemon that says, definitely need some visuals too. I always hate it when downing a handle in a game and it doesn't even blur the screen. So these buffs and debuffs are just gonna kind of come as the gameplay starts to reveal itself more. You know, accuracy debuffs and damage buffs, debuffs, stuff like that. Those will definitely be part of some of the drinks. I also like the idea of adding like some visual feedback to it, and I'll try not to make them too intrusive, but like I will have an option to disable them. It could be interesting if as more alcohol is drunk throughout a mission, Stacy becomes more cat-like / feral. Perhaps her efficient role that's mainly for dodging turns into a pounce attack that acts more like a dash, but now does damage. She could have a melee move change from something like a punch to some quick claw swipes. And John Giga Grenade said, what if there was a drink that turned her roll into a pouncing attack that deals damage, but only follows the initial position of your mouse? And I like these ideas. Going along with the first comment, there can be a threshold on the drunkenness bar, and when the player reaches it, they can start doing feral attacks like that. Having the pounce attack only go where the initial position of your mouse is, I think is a good idea, because that way it requires some skill. The Texan Insomniac had a pretty long comment, so I'll just briefly go through some of these points they made. They said, on the weapons, maybe it can kind of be a mix of both ideas, where you have to scavenge weapons, and along with that you need to learn how to adapt and improvise with whatever you get as part of the gameplay loop instead of just sticking to one specific gun or playstyle. So at this point I'm leaning towards having specific weapons for each type, like 1 or 2 assault rifles, shotguns, etc. And I'll probably do a mix of real guns and ones I designed, but having the player be able to identify the gun based on its silhouette is what I want to go for. The player should determine their strategy when they pick up the weapon before they even reach it. The second point's pretty long, and it pretty much talks about the drink system. I like the idea of having one non-cocktail drink on a cooldown, and a cocktail drink being a consumable. The non-cocktails will be stuff like straight vodka, wine, beer, whiskey, rum, gin, you know. These can give a basic buff and a health boost every so often. The cocktails will have more intricate buffs and debuffs. This comment mentions having a hangover debuff, which I think will be pretty funny. At the bar, the player will be able to unlock the cooldown alcohols and craft the cocktails with stuff they find out in the mission, like bitters and mixers and stuff. The third point says, with the story idea plus Sundara, if that's how you spell her name, and it is, it instantly reminds me of Portal 2. And the more I realize how much work getting the co-op to feel good is gonna take, the more I'm leaning towards doing something like this. That way I can design levels specifically for the single player stuff, then I can design levels specifically for co-op play. And the last part talks about melee weapons and outfit unlocks. They say that outfits can be unlocked by completing certain challenges and missions, and that's not a bad idea. I also agree with the last thing mentioned, having a mix of high-tech weapons and old school stuff. Though I do want to make the environment to be sort of like a cyberpunk, but near future cyberpunk, if that makes sense, rather than full-blown sci-fi cyberpunk. Puddle, or Pudel, says, with the isometric viewpoint, you might want to check out the Shadowrun games on the SNES and PC for some ideas. And I actually have a few Shadowrun games, but I haven't gotten around to playing them. I'm actually playing Disco Elysium right now, and yes, Deadlock. But once I'm done with that, I might check them out. They also say it might be helpful to let players choose to holster a single pistol. You cannot put it back, nor will you be able to replace it mid-job. It sounds powerful, but double crosses and post-job ambushes are always a possibility in Stacy's line of work. You wouldn't want to be unarmed when that happens, right? The player having some kind of sidearm that they can pull out in the last second is a cool idea, even if they're only able to do it just once. It kinda reminds me how certain masks in Hotline Miami started with a weapon, and how the player can pick different kits to start the level with in Project Nexus. They also say, as for the trench coat, make it an armor. Someone else mentioned that the trench coat could also be an indication of damage or armor. I'll have to think about it more in depth and test it out. Well, that's pretty much it. It's weird, I know I got a good amount of stuff done, but it doesn't really feel that way. I guess because the majority of things I did were more technical, but anyways, I'll see you later. Alright, so a friend of mine was asking how I approached the art to this game, like how I made props and stuff. I would just want to show you my pipeline of how I make props for this. So I use Blender. I've been using it for at least 4 years now, and it's great. What I want to make, I'm just thinking some kind of prop that I could just have duplicated around and stuff, but something more, a little bit more interesting than like a crate. Probably like a phone booth or like a payphone. What I'll do usually is just look for a reference. I want one that's standing up, kind of like this middle one here. So the way I look at this, there's the stand, then there's the actual phone part, and then there's like kind of this outer shell. And with the outer part, we can make it more of an interesting shape. Right now, we'll just start with that base. Alright, so there's our phone booth. It's more of a background thing, so the UVs don't have to be perfect. So now we have this model, it's UV unwrapped, and it's ready for texturing. So what I do is, I use Substance Painter a lot to get my textures with their smart materials. Sometimes, you know, I have to delve online and find textures there and stuff like that, or I'll manually do them, like all the characters are just manually painted from scratch. File, new, select iPhone. Okay. Then I go here, mode, bake mesh maps, use low poly meshes, high poly mesh, bake textures. I don't use all these textures, but I just bake all of them anyway. Turn to painting mode. Now I usually use these smart materials that just come default with Substance Painter. So the steel painted would be good for like the base because they're usually all kind of scratched and fucked up. So then add a black mask, go to this polygon fill thing, just drag your mouse over. And then for this outer shell kind of thing, I want it to be like plasticky. So there's a lot of good plastic ones in here. This should all be one piece, so we could use this three-sided thing. I could change the color of the plastic by opening up the folder, going to the base color. Select this. What do I want to be? I want it to be very faded blue. That looks good. I'm just gonna add some fill layers in. This one's just gonna be a whoops. This one's just gonna be a label, but it'll just be white. And let's make this one like green. Doesn't really matter right now. And a black mask, and this one will be for this screen here. So there's our basic texture. So we'll just export textures, and all I'm gonna do is take the base color and the AO. I use paint.net because it's free and it's very easy to use and has all the functions I need for this. I'm gonna add the AO as a layer, set it to multiply, and then we're gonna resize it. Be 256. Could probably do 128. Export it. And that's what we get. What I will do though is this little screen here, we do want it to glow. So we're gonna make an emissive texture for it. And what this is just a black and white image that tells you what parts of the texture are emissive or not. This part is emissive, so just this part, because this is where the screen is. Draw a rectangle. Make it white. make a layer under that that is just black. Now the texture will know that that's the only part that needs to be emissive. Drag into payphone. I do not create new materials. As you see, yeah, that thing's huge. So let's scale it down, undo 0.5. And I'm just gonna see how it looks. Let's see, 0.6. That seems good. Actually, I'm gonna do it in between those, which was 0.55. So go back into Blender and then scale it down 0.55. Object, apply all transformations, export it again, same name. Re-import static mesh. There we go. Now change the scale to 1 and now it's properly scaled. We're gonna bring the textures in. Right click on the texture, create material. Got a texture sample here. The image is not set to the right things though, so we gotta set the filter to nearest. There we go, now you see it's all pixelated, it's not blurry. And then let's just duplicate that and let's get the payphone emissive, which we also need to change the settings for. Throw this into the emissive. You can see it right there. I did say before that the emissive is only a black and white thing, but that's not true. You could put colors into an emissive map, so I'm actually gonna make this a little bit more green. Just re-import it. Yeah, there it is. And then payphone. There's that texture. And that's applied to the static mesh, so whenever we drag a new one out. Just like that. I like how those came out. So that's the whole process of just making models for this.